Hello everyone. Today, I'll be narrating 3 new creepyposts that I found off of the Creepy Encounter subreddit. Liking this video and subscribing to my channel helps me a lot. After you've heard these stories, let me know what you thought of them in the comments below. But without further ado, let's dive straight into their experiences.
These are their stories.
Back in 2016, my friends and I for the longest time had been itching to go camping to our local camping site in the Los Padres National Park in Southern California. When we found the perfect weekend to go that didn't interfere with any of our work schedules, we set the date. 3 days before the trip, we found out we were going to get hit by El Nino rainstorm. Us, being the type of dudes that we are, didn't care if we got hit by the storm while camping, so we packed up our cars and made the 45-minute drive to the campsite. The campsite was a family-friendly one, where there were about 100 camping lots that circled around the clearing in the forest. We found the perfect spot that was underneath huge thick trees that would help block as much rain as possible, and it helped out that the restrooms were only 30 yards away. As soon as we got to our spot, we took advantage of the afternoon sky being cleared for the moment and we rushed to set up our spot. The layout that we did was that we pitched up our tents close by, where our tent doors were only 6 feet apart. The reason why we did this is because, in order to combat the rain, I bought a 30-foot by 30-foot thick blue canopy tarp that I threw over to cover us from the rain above and from the rain that would be running through the ground. Whenever you would walk around our tent, you would be making so much noise from crunching the plastic tarp. Hours passed and we were all around the campfire. It was late into the evening and this was the first time that I noticed that there were barely any other campers. They were mainly camping in their RVs. I was getting tired from a long day of work and I decided that I was going off to knock out. My friends followed my lead as well. The way the sleeping arrangements were was that I had my friend Ray sleeping in my tent and AJ and S were sleeping in theirs. Before I called it a night, I whispered to Ray and told him, I'm going to prank call S and AJ but I'm not going to say anything. Ray smiled as I dialed my friends up. I called them unrestricted and S's phone started to ring off. Me and Ray heard them both say from a distance, "Who's calling you this late at night?" "I don't know, they called me unrestricted. Are you gonna answer?" "Of course not." Ray and I were holding in our laughter as they ignored our call. I decided to do it one more time. Once their phone started to ring, they started to freak out once again and they said, "Who is it this time?" "Same person, I think. I'm gonna answer." As they did answer, S said hello. Ray and I had to hold in our laughter as we kept as quiet as possible, not wanting to make any noises that would give off that it was us. I held the phone close to my mouth as I began to breathe heavily in a murderous way. I ended the call and just hearing them freak out the way they did was making my night even funnier. Ray and I looked at one another and immediately started to bawl out in laughter. AJ and S were so mad at us for pulling this prank on them and they were cursing us out. Me, finally calming down from laughing so loudly, told the boys, "Good night, I will have pancakes ready in the morning." Since I fall asleep relatively easily, I was out in a matter of minutes, while Ray, AJ, and S were up for a while longer. I was the first of my friends to wake up in the morning and as I promised, I had the pancakes already cooking by the time that anyone else woke up. The smell of me cooking woke up my friends and one by one, they got out of their tents. As we were eating, AJ spoke up and said, "Hey Jay, the prank that you pulled last night went a little too far. Yeah, you had us ready to run to our car and take off." Feeling a bit guilty, apologized and said, "Sorry guys, my bad." Yeah, it's one thing to prank call us like that, but then to walk around our tent and then go inside in the middle of the night is totally out of limits, as said. Me, not knowing what they were talking about, said, "What do you guys mean? Come on, still with the jokes? You were the one that was walking around our tent and you walked in." Ray spoke up and said, "That wasn't Jay who was walking around. I thought that was you two getting your revenge on us for scaring you. That wasn't us doing that, it was you two." So to explain, after I fell asleep, about an hour had passed where Ray, S, and AJ was still up and all was quiet in the forest until the sounds of footsteps were heard stepping on our blue tarp that was on the ground. At first my friends thought that it could have been just a forest animal wandering around, but the heavy footsteps were a dead giveaway that it was a person. As they described, the person was walking all around our tents, making constant figure eights. The person would place their fingers on the tent's fabric walls to run them up and down. The footsteps finally stopped after a couple of minutes, right in between our tent doors. The 3 of them were already having their hearts pounding out of their chest. It was silent for a long minute until the sound of the tent zipper being slid open. As AJ says, the tent's door was only open halfway, but it was too dark to see anything clearly. But in the darkness, both S and AJ saw the silhouette of a man's face pop his head into the tent to look at both of them. AJ and S faked being asleep the entire time, but they kept their eyes locked onto the man. The man then opened the tent fully and walked inside the tent, just standing at the entrance. The man didn't say a word or do anything, just watched the both of them laying in their sleeping bags. After the longest minute ever, the man just took his steps out of the tent and his footsteps were heard walking away, disappearing into the night. The entire time that this was happening, S and AJ thought that it was either me or Ray doing this, and Ray thought that it was AJ or S doing this. Back to us arguing back and forth at the breakfast table, we were interrupted by a man walking to our campsite and he said, "Good morning boys, how did the 4 of you sleep last night?" This man spoke in a smoker's voice. He wore a dirty, sweat-stained white t-shirt that looked more gray at this point and his blue jeans looked as if they had never been taken off from his pants. He smelled like liquor, not a good sign at 8 in the morning, and his words were just mumbling around. We didn't say a word to this guy, as he then asked us if we had any cigarettes to spare him. I said that we didn't smoke, and he said, "Oh, well, if you boys want to visit me in my RV, just stop by any time." The man continued to walk away, towards the restrooms. As he was done using it, he walked back to our campsite. He didn't say anything this time, but he looked at us and gave us a nearly toothless smile, and he walked back to his RV. I took note of his RV, as it was the only RV that was stuck out as being dirty and more run down than the others. We quickly assumed that this was probably the man who was walking around our tents last night, and Des and AJ now remembered that they smelled liquor from the person who was standing in their tent. We all agreed that we would keep an extra eye out on this guy, and if he did spend another night, we would most likely report him to the park rangers if he tried anything else. When it was around lunchtime now, the man came back, not to use the restroom, but just to talk to us. "So are any of you boys interested in buying an RV? You can all go check it out right now and see if you want to buy it. I don't need it anymore since I recently divorced. Just check out the inside of the RV." "No, we are good, sir," I said with a visible threatening tone. The man seemed to notice this and he walked away. The man did end up leaving a few hours before sunset, but the entire time that he was there, he kept glancing at us. The man had his RV about 50 yards away from us, and I noticed that he had a restroom right next to his RV. Why did he make an effort in walking all the way over to our campsite to use our restroom? Also, why did he even use ours if RVs come with restrooms installed in them? Whatever the man wanted, we were just glad that we were able to enjoy the rest of our weekend. So this happened almost exactly 3 years ago. I had just turned 15. I live in Finland, and turning 15 is a big thing for teenagers here, since once you turn 15, you can get a 50cc moped license, and these kind of bikes were a huge part of youth culture here. So long story short, I had just got my license and was at a party at my friend's house. This friend of mine came from a wealthy family, and their family owned a huge plot of land, mostly full of inhabited forest and lakes. His house was pretty much in the middle of their land, and it was a very remote place surrounded by forest. Although I lived pretty far away, I insisted on going by myself with my brand new moped since I was so excited for finally having one. My parents were obviously against this, but ultimately allowed me to drive there. This party lasted the entire day, and it was about 2 a.m. I had to finally leave. Although their family is wealthy, the only road that connects my friend's house to the big main road is a long, badly kept, and narrow paved road surrounded by forest. It is very unsettling, especially at night. It should have been illuminated properly, but at the time pretty much every single street lamp was either broken or tipped over by storms. Since it was completely dark, the only thing illuminating the road was the small single front light in my moped. After about 10 minutes on the road, I was about 5 or so minutes away from the main road, so it was still pitch black. Nothing was out of the ordinary until I saw movement in the corner of my eye. I saw a figure running from the pitch black forest and falling down on its face in the middle of the road in front of me with branches and leaves flying around the figure. I slammed the brakes and luckily avoided hitting the figure. The back brake locked up, so I ended up falling over and sliding along the road for a bit. When I finally stopped, I quickly stood up. I was okay apart from a few scratches. I looked to where the figure was laying. Of course I thought that it was an animal like a moose or a deer, but I quickly realized that it wasn't an animal. It was an adult human, a man to be exact. At this point he stood up and we were about 3 meters from each other, just staring at each other. I'd never been more scared in my life. Even more disturbing was that this man seemed to be more scared of me than I was of him. This man was probably in his 20s or 30s, quite short and very thin. His face was pale and his eyes were deep in his eye sockets. He looked very malnourished. He was wearing a dirty blue hoodie and basketball shorts, despite it being less than 5 degrees Celsius outside. He had unkempt blonde hair full of debris and leaves and had no shoes on, only soaking wet socks. At this point he was constantly shaking, jolting, and glaring to the direction he came out of with a worried expression on his face, like he was being chased or he knew that something was bad in the forest. I wanted to say something to him, but I was unable to say anything. After a short while he looked straight to me and opened his mouth. It was like he was about to say something, but he quickly backpedaled, closed his mouth, and suddenly bolted to the forest without a flashlight or any other source of light, and quickly disappeared. I stood there for a while alone before running to my moped, lifting it up and driving as fast as I could to the main road. My moped had quite a few big dents, a broken front mask, and a damaged exhaust, but it was still drivable. I drove home and woke up my parents to explain everything while I was still shivering from shock. They obviously were furious that I had crashed my moped and didn't believe what happened. They thought I was probably doing stunts at night until I fell over. I didn't get grounded, but they didn't let me drive at night anymore. It was alright with me, since I didn't want to do that either. For the entirety of the following week, I asked anyone who was in the party or was living nearby if they had seen anything unusual. I also followed the news to find out if there was something bad that happened nearby on that night, or if there was an escaped convict or a mental hospital patient loose. Nothing showed up and nobody else saw anything. I honestly have no idea why a guy looking like that would be running around in the forest during the night. I wish I was able to get more information as to what I experienced that night. This whole thing took place over 10 years ago when I was 16. I was just a bored teenager in a somewhat small town and wanted to get off the computer for a bit. So it was around midnight when someone like me really should have stayed in, but I felt like just going on a long walk, which I never did. It was a chill place. Once you get past the school in the neighborhood or to one end of the neighborhood, there's a long road with some nice homes on it that heads towards the grocery store and a bigger road with 4 lanes. This long road has a sidewalk, barely any lights, and goes past a big open area with a horse farm and one small waste facility across from the road from the horse field. The facility is up a slight incline, and between it and the road is a dip in the ground for the rainwater to accumulate and run beneath a driveway, meaning if you drove off the road you'd basically be going down a small half pipe right there. So I walked past the school, past this horse field, and all the way down the long road to the 4-lane road, and I kept walking. It's now around 1 AM and the roads are empty, but they're totally illuminated by streetlight, so I felt fine. At some point this little car speeds down the road way too close to the sidewalk, and I saw their brake lights come on as they kept driving pretty fast. Something about the car and how close they drove to the sidewalk gave me this major feeling of fear and that I needed to just go home. It wasn't a, oh, they just came close to me fear, but it was a full body feeling that told me I should go. So I walked back for a good 30 to 45 minutes and I was now coming back to the horse field on this dark road, which meant I just needed to make it past this wide open area before I was at the school, which basically meant I was home. This whole time I kept looking back and watching for cars or someone, but now I was feeling safe because it had been for so long and I was on this super dark road. Right before the horse field there was this big front yard of some country house that's down a dirt road. The front yard had a fence, but it was just posts with 3 planks going across it, which meant a person could easily slide between the planks if they just angled themselves right. I'm getting to the end of that yard when a car speeds by me, and it's the exact same shape as the car that passed me before, and I got that same feeling of fear. I see the brake lights light up, and this time they slowed down drastically before whipping the car to the side of the road to go down into that dip at the waste facility, drive up the incline to circle around, and drive back out to the road like a madman in the span of probably 3 to 4 seconds. No one in their right mind would have used that dip to turn around even slowly, and whipping the car around that way is abnormal anyways. I was nearly frozen watching them do that because I knew it was the same car and I felt that something bad was probably going to happen to me. Right at the corner of that front yard by the field, there was a big oak tree away from that fence from the yard. The bottom plank for the fence was just barely above the ground, maybe a few inches up the post is all, so it was just enough to hide me if I laid down against it. The moment I saw that car's headlights start to turn around to drive the other way, my first instinct was just to dive into that spot between the tree and the plank. I fit perfectly and managed to get in place before they turned left, back onto the road. Put my hood over the back of my head and just laid there. I heard their brakes sliding against the wheel as they drove past that yard, and then heard them speed up and drive away a second later. I didn't look. I kept my head down until I was sure they were gone. I got up, looked back, and made sure I saw no silhouettes of cars and no lights and just booked it up the road to the school. I never went out that late alone again. That was a lesson learned. Trust your gut and try to always have a way to protect yourself if need be. Alright, so that's it. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. Let me know what you thought of these stories in the comments below. But as always,
Have a nice day.